Hi, everybody. Great to be here today. To introduce myself, I'm Maxwell Robinson. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of 84 Partners. We're a Vietnam-focused advisory firm that helps with mergers and acquisitions and fundraising. Today, I'm going to give an overview of the health and wellness sector in Southeast Asia. It's a sector that I'm personally very interested in. Someone who's health conscious, loves fitness, and one that we're focusing a lot on as a company, as there's a lot of growth in the sector and interest from both private equity and strategic investors in the space. So here we go. So today, I'm going to go over some key drivers of growth of the healthcare industry in Southeast Asia, some companies and investors to watch in the space, and finally, I'm going to share some thoughts on career. Let's get into it, shall we? So first, Southeast Asia has been one of the most impressive economic success stories over recent decades. GDP is more than $3 trillion, which puts it just behind India, but ahead of the UK, as around the sixth largest economy in the world. GDP per capita is in the middle income status, with the exception of Singapore, which is an outlier. And so these days, people have more disposable income to spend on health and wellness. Healthcare spending has grown in absolute terms and also as a percent of GDP, with, of course, a bit of a spike around COVID-19. And there's still a lot of room to grow in terms of healthcare spending, as developed countries normally spend 10% or more, with the US at around 20%. So at 4 to 5%, still quite a bit of room for growth. Another massive success story for the region is that life expectancy has increased anywhere from 10 years in the past 60 years to almost 30 years on the average lifespan in Thailand since 1960. That's thanks to better nutrition, sanitation, healthcare, and other factors. So huge success there for the region. And with people living longer and the high birth rates in the early part of this chart, population has tripled to more than around 600 million people, which is more than the EU at about 450 million, and a lot more than the US at around 340 million. As you can see from the bottom part of the chart, the population of young people has leveled off while the population of older groups is increasing, which, as we know, that will tend to drive higher healthcare costs. Birth rates have been falling steadily over the decades with higher incomes and education. And with the exception of the Philippines, most of the countries in the region are at or below replacement rate of around 2.1. And with the exception of Singapore, countries don't have significant immigration. Which means what we're seeing is a huge spike in the proportion of older people compared to younger people. And while at 8% of the population above 65 years and up, that's nothing like Japan, which is about 30%, or Italy, which is 24%. But as you can see, the trend is similar. It's the proportion of 65 plus has tripled in the past 60 years. And again, due to those lower birth rates. So with changing diets and lifestyles, with increased income, and also with better treatment of acute diseases and injuries, what we see is a higher burden of non-communicable diseases like cancer and here diabetes. At 19%, Malaysia has one of the highest rates of diabetes in the world. And you can see that most of the other countries have generally been increasing over the past decade, with the rate in Vietnam doubling. One interesting fact is that the US, which as we know has a high obesity rate, the diabetes rate is actually 11%, which is similar to Indonesia and Singapore. So obesity is not always correlated one-to-one with diabetes. You can have thinner people with diabetes as well. So to summarize and to segue, in the region we have higher incomes, aging populations, and more chronic diseases. And this will all continue to drive increased healthcare spending in the region in the decades to come. Now, I'm going to cover some companies and investors that are helping to meet the healthcare needs of the Southeast Asian population. In the listed market, the biggest players are generally the hospital networks like Bangkok Dusit, IHH, which owns Parkway and Mount Elizabeth, and also Raffles. And given the growth in the sector, private equity players are very active in the space, especially in hospital chains where they can put hundreds of millions of dollars to work for funds like TPG, KKR, and then sell or take the company public. So you've seen a lot of private activity in the space and a lot of continued interest, including in the work we do in Vietnam. There's also a lot of venture capital funding in the space in the region. So especially during the pandemic, there was a surge in the utilization of telehealth. And as you've seen, there are both regional players that have emerged in recent years, like Dr. Anywhere, and also a number of country-focused players, Allo Doctor, and a number of players in Vietnam, including Geo, Med247, Docosan. And in these charts, in the coming slides, I'll show the funding and also selected investors. And interesting to take a look at the investors that you see over and over. Monks Hill and Heritas are a couple that you're going to see over and over as consistent investors in the space. There's also more specialized players that have gotten funding recently. Novi focuses on diabetes. Mito focuses on preventive health and longevity. Same with Chi, which is a new longevity clinic in Singapore. I think the idea here is that these specialized players can do a better job in their domain than the general broad telehealth platforms that focus on a larger segment of offerings. Further to the theme of specialization, there are a number of brands that have emerged recently with slick branding focused on men's and women's health and fertility. And you've probably seen some of these online. They're Gen Z and millennial focused, and they really do a great job of making healthcare more accessible, less clinical, which I think is a good thing. Thankfully, a lot of companies are also emerging to help provide mental health care in the region. You've definitely seen this trend in the US, and it's also emerging here. And just for a bit of context, I read an article yesterday that suicide last year was unfortunately on the increase in Singapore, and it's the leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 29 here. And so it's great that these companies are emerging to meet the mental health needs of the population in a digital and friendly interface that I think is more accessible to people, especially younger people. So these tend to be B2B or B2B2C businesses, working with insurers, employers, although there is a B2C component in some of them as well. A few more companies here. We have Homus that works in big data for behavioral health. Nala that's focused on personalized medicine, and Activo, which is interestingly working on a wellness score, takes into account your exercise, your sleep, etc. Has an algorithm that gives a score for that, so you can track your wellness over time and what you may need to adjust. And finally, Singapore is working on developing the pharmaceutical sector. As you can see, government-linked investors like Temasek and Heliconia, Pavilion have invested in some of these companies here. And as you can see, the funding amounts are much bigger than the services side that we've talked about previously. And this is more in the sciences side. Unfortunately, I just read news that Tessa is shutting down. So it is a risky sector. But of course, when things go well, early investors can make huge returns in the pharmaceutical space when the company goes public or gets acquired by a bigger pharmaceutical player. Okay, now for some thoughts on career. But just a caveat, be very wary of taking advice from other people on career, including from me, because it's a very individual thing, but just to share some thoughts that might be interesting, or some lessons I've learned. So first, it's important to understand that people are built very differently. I think we all seem to have a bias that everyone thinks like us, which makes sense because it's coming from our mind. But when we start to interact with other people and realize that their decisions are maybe very different from ours, we realize that what's going on in their mind is different from us. So what that means in terms of career is that to increase your chances of having a rewarding career, you can't just follow what other people do blindly. You need to understand yourself, understand the job market, and then make your own path. So again, it's good to learn from others, but we need to understand what makes them happy. It may not make us happy or rewarded. And a related point is that wanting what someone else has is also a package deal, right? I may say that I want to be rich like Elon Musk, but at the same time, I may or may not want to sleep at the office, not see my kids as much like he does, etc. So ultimately, it's a package deal. And if we just see the outcome that someone has and say we want that, you have to also take into account all the hard work that got them there and whether that's something we want to sacrifices we want to make in our lives. Second, another gem from Ray Dalio. Sometimes it's communicated to us or we believe that we can really have it all. But the reality is our time is finite, our energy is finite, and we need to make trade-offs in life. And it's not a good outcome for us if we try to do everything and then we end up not achieving what's really important to us in life, whether it's like for Elon Musk, again, getting to colonizing space, colonizing Mars, those goals, you can see that those kind of goals are really important to him and he works hard to achieve them. So it's important to focus on what goals make us happy. And that said, there is something to be said for working at a job that you may not like early in your career if it gives you the financial freedom to do what you want later. So I guess there's two paths: make enough money so you can do what you want, or really find the career where you're doing what you want and you can do that over a long time. I think no right answer. And life does move quickly and some of the career is path dependent. So it's good to take some time to reflect to make sure you're on the right path and not just going 100% every day, but reflecting. And it's also okay to change your goals over time. I think that will happen as you get more life experience and you'll adjust. But I think this quote about being able to have almost anything we want, but not everything we want, is something I think about a lot. Next, I think it's important to think about the industry, function, and geography you want to focus on in your life, because there are compounding returns to your knowledge and connections in that industry, in the area that you live in. And if you jump around a lot in networks and industries, of course, there's some benefit to that in terms of cross-functional knowledge, but also there's an opportunity cost because you won't get as much compounding effect in those areas if you do switch around a lot. So think about what path you're on carefully and know that there are opportunity costs if you jump around. Next, the people that are really successful usually stand out in some very valuable way. So I think it's important for each of us to figure out what unique things we bring, what unique qualities and approaches we bring to the various problems the world has to offer. And then we need to do a great job of selling ourselves to the world. If you have amazing standout talent, you may not need to, but for the rest of us, it's important to have a public image that helps us to get to our goals, and it communicates our uniqueness and our value to the world. And finally, some of us, including me sometimes, tend to be a bit idealistic, and we think that if we work hard and that's all that's necessary to move up and be successful, maybe like it was in school, where things are where it's clear what you need to do to get a certain grade. World of work is more complicated than that. So I think if you want to maximize your potential, you need to understand the system, understand how companies work, hierarchies work, and be able to operate effectively in those situations. So there are a couple of books I mentioned here that are helpful for that. And finally, great to speak with you today. I hope you found it interesting. Healthcare space is truly exciting, tons of opportunity. And if you have any questions or comments or just want to connect, please reach out. Thank you very much.